A human infant is, biologically speaking, an emergency. It cannot walk, cannot cling, cannot regulate its own temperature reliably, and cannot follow its mother anywhere. A newborn foal stands within an hour. A newborn human takes about a year and remains dependent for a decade after that. By the standards of the animal kingdom, this is a catastrophic design, and yet it is the design that produced the species that changed the planet. The reason is that at some point in our past, something happened that no other animal has done in quite the same way. Humans invented childhood, not the fact of being young, which every animal has, but childhood as an extended, protected, strangely unproductive stretch of life, whose entire purpose is to build a brain. Working out when that happened and why is one of the more interesting problems in human evolution. And the evidence comes from a surprising place: teeth. Teeth are the best clock in the fossil record. As they grow, enamel is laid down in daily increments, leaving microscopic lines, the same principle as tree rings, at a much finer scale. Under a microscope, you can count them, and you can determine how old an individual was when they died, and how fast their development was running. Apply this to fossil hominins, and a picture emerges. In chimpanzees, the first permanent molar erupts at around 3 years of age. In modern humans, it erupts at around 6. That gap is the signature of a slowed-down childhood, and it is enormous in evolutionary terms. Analysis of early hominin fossils has found that the earliest members of our lineage were much closer to the ape pattern. The famous Tong child, an Australopithecus specimen from South Africa, around 2.5 million years old, was originally estimated to have died at about 6 years old based on human developmental timing. Dental microstructure analysis revised that downward considerably, the child was developing on a faster schedule, closer to a chimpanzee's. The slowdown appears later. Studies of Homo erectus specimens suggest an intermediate pattern, slower than an ape, faster than us. And by the time you reach Neanderthals and early modern humans, the extended pattern is largely in place, though some analyses suggest Neanderthals may have grown somewhat faster than we do. So the timeline, roughly, childhood stretched out gradually over the last 2 million years, most dramatically within our own genus. The next question is why? And here the answer is metabolic, and it is quite stark. Brains are extraordinarily expensive. The adult human brain is about 2% of body weight and consumes around 20% of the body's energy at rest. In a young child, that fraction is far higher. Research measuring brain glucose consumption across development found that in children around 4 to 5 years old, the brain may be taking up to 2/3 of the body's resting energy budget. 2/3. For a single organ. And the same research identified something that explains a great deal. The period of peak brain energy demand coincides with the period of slowest body growth. Children grow remarkably slowly compared to other primates during exactly the years when the brain is most expensive. The interpretation is direct. The body is not growing because the energy is going to the brain instead. Childhood, on this reading, is a metabolic trade. You delay building the body in order to finish building the brain. But that trade only works if someone else is paying for the food. A child in that state cannot feed itself. Which brings us to the second half of the story, and it is the part that most people find genuinely surprising. Humans do something extremely rare among mammals. We feed children who are no longer nursing but not yet independent. Chimpanzee mothers nurse for 4 to 5 years, and after weaning, the juvenile largely forages for itself. Human children are weaned much earlier, in many traditional societies around 2 to 3 years, and then continue to be provisioned by adults for a decade or more. That is the crucial innovation. Early weaning, combined with continued feeding, it has an immediate demographic consequence. A chimpanzee mother cannot have another infant until the first is weaned, which means roughly 5 to 6 years between births. A human mother whose weaned child is being fed by others can have another. Birth intervals in traditional human societies are often around 3 years. So humans can raise multiple dependent offspring simultaneously, something almost no other ape does. But someone has to do the feeding. And this is where the research gets interesting. The anthropologist Kristen Hawkes and colleagues proposed what became known as the grandmother hypothesis, based on field observations of Hadza foragers in Tanzania. They documented that older women past reproductive age were highly productive foragers, and that their food contributions were significant for the nutrition of their grandchildren. The proposal is that human menopause, itself very unusual in the animal kingdom, exists because an older woman contributes more to her genetic legacy by provisioning existing grandchildren than by having more children herself. The hypothesis remains debated, and there are serious alternative explanations. But the broader principle it points to, that human childhood is subsidized by people other than the mother, is now well supported. Anthropologists call this cooperative breeding, and the evidence across foraging societies is substantial. Fathers, siblings, aunts, grandparents, and unrelated group members all contribute to feeding and caring for children. Sarah Hrdy has argued that this arrangement may be the origin of some of our most distinctive psychological traits. A human infant who must attract care from multiple adults, not just its mother, faces a different problem from a chimp infant clinging to a single body. It benefits from reading faces, monitoring attention, seeking eye contact, and engaging socially. And human infants do all of these at a level no other ape approaches. On this account, our social intelligence is a consequence of having been raised by committees. There is a further consequence that follows from cooperative breeding, and it is one of the more unsettling findings in the field. If children are raised by a group rather than a single mother, then the group has to be willing, and willingness is not automatic. Hrdy has pointed out that a chimpanzee mother will not hand her newborn to anyone. Human mothers, across cultures, routinely do, often within hours of birth. That tolerance is a species-level trait, and it implies a level of mutual trust that no other ape maintains. It also implies something colder. If care is conditional on the group's capacity, then care can be withdrawn. Anthropologists and historians have documented that in societies operating close to subsistence, decisions about which infants received full investment were sometimes made explicitly, and the deciding factors were typically the mother's support network and the spacing of previous births. This is grim material, and it is easy to moralize about from a position of abundance, but it follows directly from the arithmetic. A child that takes a decade to raise cannot be raised on optimism. What this means is that human childhood was never simply given, it was allocated, and the length and richness of any particular childhood depended on how much surplus the surrounding adults had to spend on it. That relationship has not gone away. It has just changed units. Now, what is that expensive childhood actually building? The answer is not knowledge. Primarily, it is architecture. Human brain development involves a long period of synaptic overproduction, followed by extensive pruning. The brain builds far more connections than it will keep, and then eliminates the ones that go unused, shaped by actual experience. This process continues into the 20s in some regions, particularly the prefrontal cortex. That is a strategy with a clear logic. Rather than arriving with a brain pre-configured for a specific environment, the human arrives with a brain that configures itself to whatever environment it lands in. The Arctic, the rainforest, a city. The cost is a very long period of vulnerability. The return is a species that lives everywhere. And the mechanism that fills that period is play. Play is not idle. Across mammals, play is strongly associated with species that have complex social lives and long development. Studies have linked play deprivation in young animals to measurable deficits in social behavior and stress regulation. Human children play far more and for far longer than any other species, and much of that play is a rehearsal for adult life, object manipulation, social negotiation, role-taking, rule-following. There is an ethnographic detail that captures this well. In many foraging societies, children play with miniature versions of adult tools, small bows, small digging sticks. Nobody is running a class. The children are simply doing badly, repeatedly, and with great enthusiasm what the adults do well. The learning is a side effect. So put the whole thing together. The day humans invented childhood was not a day. It was a slow negotiation running across 2 million years, in which our ancestors traded early independence for a longer, more expensive, more thoroughly constructed brain, and made that trade possible by inventing something equally unusual: adults who feed children who are not their own. Every part of it is strange. A body that grows slowly so a brain can grow fast. A weaning age that arrives long before self-sufficiency. females who live decades past the ability to reproduce, children who spend years doing nothing that produces food, and a group that tolerates it. None of that would survive a straightforward cost-benefit analysis in the short term. It only makes sense across a whole life and across generations, which is arguably the most human thing about it. Childhood is the largest bet our species ever made, an enormous investment of energy, food, time, and attention paid out over a decade on the possibility that the resulting mind would be worth it. It was, but nobody making the investment ever got to see the return. They only got to feed the child. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next.